My name is Rachel Morgan, and at 34, I never imagined I'd come home and feel like an intruder in my own house. I had decided to end my business trip in Zurich a couple of days early, and when I arrived, I walked into a party with at least 80 people. My mother, Beverly, was in my kitchen, wearing an apron and bossing around caterers. My brother, Ethan, was playing bartender behind my grandfather, Maxwell's antique bar. It was a full-blown family reunion, and I had no idea it was happening in the very house my grandfather had specifically willed to me. If you happen to be watching this from your own family, get together. I truly hope it's a warmer welcome than the one I got. Feel free to share your own family reunion stories in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to see what unfolded after I made a choice that changed absolutely everything. I clawed my way up the career ladder. While most of my friends from college were out having fun, I was usually up until 3 a.m., hunched over a keyboard, teaching myself the coding skills that would eventually get my foot in the door at Next Gen Solutions. I started at the bottom, a junior software engineer in a cubicle so tiny I could stretch out my arms and touch both walls. For 7 long years, I pushed through 80-hour work weeks, fueled by little more than instant noodles and sheer grit. When my colleagues would complain about tough clients or impossible deadlines, I just lowered my head and figured out a way to get it done. That kind of commitment got me noticed. By the time I was 30, I was heading up my own development team. 2 years later, I made history as the youngest executive director the company had ever had. My grandfather, Maxwell, was my staunchest ally through it all. He was an engineer from the old school, a man who built bridges across the country with his own 2 hands. He knew what dedication and quality craftsmanship meant. When I was 12, he bought me my first computer. I remember my mother, Beverly, rolling her eyes and muttering that I should be outside playing with the other kids. But Grandpa Maxwell would just shoot me a wink and whisper, "Some people build with steel, others build with code. Both change the world." Every Sunday, all through high school, I would go visit him at the old Victorian house that had been in our family for 3 generations. While my mother and brother always found excuses to skip these visits, I'd sit with Grandpa in his study. He taught me about structural integrity, mathematical principles, and, most importantly, personal integrity. "A Morgan never cuts corners," he'd tell me, gesturing to the elaborate woodwork on his antique desk. "The person who built this took pride in their work, even in the parts no one would ever see. That's how you know you can trust someone." My brother, Ethan, who is 3 years younger than me, chose a different route. He was born with a natural charm that just made people want to hand him things. While I had to earn every one of my accomplishments, Ethan just seemed to expect them. He enrolled in and dropped out of 4 different college programs. Each time, he'd managed to convince our mother that he had finally discovered his true passion. And each new passion needed some startup cash, which Beverly would always manage to scrape together from her teacher's salary, pushing her own finances to the brink. When Grandpa Maxwell passed away 2 years ago, his will was a shock to everyone except me. The family home, a historic Victorian in what was now a very fashionable Boston neighborhood, valued at nearly $2 million, was left entirely to me. The note included in the will was short and sweet. To Rachel, who understands the value of building something to last. My mother was furious. He must have been confused near the end, she argued. That house is for the entire family. She fully expected me to either sign it over to them or sell it and divide the money between the three of us. But I couldn't bring myself to do that. The house was more than just wood and plaster to me. It was every Sunday afternoon lesson, every proud smile he gave me when I told him about my achievements, every peaceful moment I spent in his library surrounded by his book collection. I moved in right away, carefully restoring the rooms while making sure to keep their historical character. I turned the library into my home office, but left all of Grandpa's books and his antique desk right where they were. I even replanted his garden, following his detailed notes to bring back the heirloom, roses he had spent decades cultivating. Despite the tension from the inheritance, I made an effort to keep a relationship with my mother and brother. I'd invite them over for holiday dinners, which they would attend with the air of guests, visiting a museum, rather than family. When Ethan came up with his latest business idea, a food truck, I offered to help him with the business plan instead of just handing over cash. He turned me down. I even offered to help my mother with her mortgage payments. She accepted the money, but never missed a chance to bring it up, making it sound like a loan I was charging interest on instead of a gift. The trip to Zurich was a huge moment for my career. NextGen had been trying to land Helvetica banking systems as a client for years. As the new international accounts director, securing this deal would solidify my reputation and open up the entire European market for our company. After 2 exhausting weeks of presentations, negotiations, and barely any sleep, I walked away with a 3-year contract worth millions. The team wanted to stay in Zurich for the weekend to celebrate, but I was just homesick. I wanted to celebrate my own way, a quiet evening in my garden with a good bottle of wine, just reflecting on how far I'd come. I booked an earlier flight, not telling anyone I was coming back 2 days ahead of schedule. This was going to be my own private victory celebration. On the flight home, I found myself scrolling through pictures of my garden on my phone. The spring tulips should be in full bloom by now. I had planted them in a pattern Grandpa designed years ago, which spelled out his favorite motto, "Onward," when you looked at it from the upstairs window. I thought about the bottle of Cabernet I had been saving for a truly special occasion. This was definitely it. The Uber pulled onto my street, and I felt that familiar sense of comfort that comes with returning home after a long journey. That feeling lasted for about 12 seconds. Then I saw the cars. They were everywhere, lining both sides of the street, parked on my lawn, and even blocking my driveway. The thumping bass of music vibrated through my normally peaceful neighborhood. My driver had to pull over half a block away. "Looks like quite a party," he remarked as he helped me with my suitcase. I just stood there on the sidewalk, staring at my house, trying to process the scene. Lights were on in every single window, casting dancing shadows of people inside. The sounds of laughter and loud conversation spilled out into my meticulously kept garden, where strangers were now standing around in groups, holding plastic cups and flicking cigarette ashes into my flower beds. What was going on? Had squatters taken over my house? I took a deep breath and began wheeling my suitcase up the path to my own front door, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach with every step. The walk from the street to my front door felt like a dream. My garden, which I had poured countless weekends into perfecting, was now a trampled disaster. The tulips that Grandpa and I had planned out were crushed by careless footsteps. Cigarette butts littered the lawn like some kind of toxic confetti. Someone had dragged my hand, carved teak garden chairs into a circle to create a makeshift smoking lounge, and the wood was now stained with rings from sweating beer bottles. I saw a group of middle-aged men I didn't recognize standing near my koi pond. One of them was trying to toss coins into it for good luck. I wanted to scream at him that copper is poisonous to fish, but I was too shocked to even form the words. Children were running wild through the yard, one of them getting dangerously close to a stone lantern my grandfather had imported from Japan in the 1970s. No one even glanced at me as I walked up to my own house. Why would they? I was just another anonymous face in a crowd of strangers. The front door was propped open with a potted plant from my sunroom. The moment I stepped inside, my senses were assaulted. The first thing that hit me was the smell, a sickening mix of cloying perfumes, various food odors, and spilled liquor. The noise was deafening. Dozens of conversations were happening at once. Music was blasting from my living room stereo, and kids were shrieking as they chased each other up and down my staircase. The air was hot and thick, suffocating with the heat of so many bodies packed into a space designed for a handful of people. My foyer, usually a serene space with a simple antique table and a mirror, was now buried under a mountain of purses, jackets, and gift bags. A cheap banner was stretched across the archway to the living room. Amargan Famamael Ruin 2025. Bira INGNT GNER8 IOMS TAGI HER. Someone had even set up a folding table with name tags and a guest book. I moved through my own home in a complete daze, seeing distant relatives I hadn't laid eyes on in years mingling with people I had never seen before in my life. My great-aunt Mabel, who I was pretty sure lived in Arizona, was holding court in my reading nook with a group of other elderly women. Cousins I only vaguely remembered from childhood summers were gathered around my dining table, which had been extended with rented tables to support a massive buffet. Then I saw my mother in the kitchen. She was wearing an apron and pointing, directing two women who looked like they were from a catering service. She was showing them where to find more serving platters in my pantry. Beverly is 62, but she looked younger, with her hair freshly highlighted and a new dress I'd never seen before, complete with a corsage pinned to it. When she finally turned and saw me standing there, her face showed no joy, no surprise. Instead, she just looked annoyed, her smile faltering for a second. "Rachel, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Europe until Sunday." "Not. welcome home, not missed you. Just pure irritation that I had shown up unexpectedly at my own house. I live here, Mom, I said, my mind still struggling to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. What is all this? It's the family reunion, she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. We've been planning it for months. Planning what? In my house. Without telling me, as she waved her hand dismissively. Knew you were busy with work. Besides, you're always saying we should use the house more, that it's too big for just you. That was a complete lie. I had never said anything even close to that. In fact, I had been very clear about my boundaries with the house, especially after Ethan once brought his friends over for a surprise pool party while I was at work. Before I could even argue, my brother appeared carrying a tray of empty glasses. At 31, Ethan still had that boyish charm that had bailed him out of trouble his whole life. He was wearing a blue button-down shirt with Morgan Family Reunion Host embroidered on the pocket. "Oh, you're back early," he said casually. Surprise! The word was an afterthought, completely lacking any real warmth. "How did you even get in?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. "Mom had the spare key you gave her for emergencies." Ethan replied with a shrug. "Don't worry, it's all under control. We hired a cleaning crew for tomorrow." I looked around at my home, which had been transformed without my knowledge or consent into a party venue for a crowd of people who were mostly strangers to me. I could see fresh scratches on my hardwood floors where furniture had been dragged. Someone had completely rearranged my living room to fit more chairs, shoving my grandmother's antique secretary desk against a wall. A cluster of wine glasses sat on its surface, leaving wet rings on the 19th century wood. A tall, older man I didn't recognize approached me with a quizzical look. "You look familiar. Are you from Mabel's side of the family? Or Richard's?" "I'm Rachel Morgan. This is my house," I said, my voice flat. His eyes widened just a little. "Oh, you're Maxwell's granddaughter. The one who got the house." The way he said, "Got the house?" made it sound like I'd won some game show prize. Not like I had inherited the home of my grandfather, a place where I'd spent countless hours of my life. "Yes, I own this house," I clarified. "Well, it's real nice of you to host everyone. Beautiful place. Should have been split up among the family, though, if you ask me." A lot of folks were surprised by Maxwell's decision. He just wandered off before I could even respond, leaving me fuming. I moved through the crowd, catching bits and pieces of similar conversations. Never see her at family functions anyway. Spends all her time working. Doesn't even know half the family. What would she do with all this space? I noticed that someone had gone into my attic, taken family photos out of my storage boxes, and put them on display. Cousins were rifling through my grandfather's record collection. Someone had moved my laptop off my desk in my office to make room for a dessert table. My private space had been completely invaded. In the dining room, I found a stack of custom, printed T-shirts that said, "Morgan Family Reunion 2025, and a date from 3 weeks ago. This wasn't some spontaneous get-together. It had been meticulously planned for a long time, all without me. My head was spinning. I needed to get some air. I stepped out onto the back porch, only to find it taken over by a group of teenagers I didn't recognize, all scrolling on their phones and complaining about being dragged to some lame family thing. I walked back through the house, past my mother, who was now posing for pictures with people she introduced as her second cousins from Chicago, past Ethan, who was mixing drinks and soaking up the attention from female relatives, past some great uncle and a first cousin once removed. No one seemed to notice as I picked up my suitcase, which was still sitting in the foyer, right where I'd left it. No one called out to me as I walked out the front door. I was halfway down the block before the tears started blurring my vision. I pulled out my phone and booked a room at the Marriott downtown. I couldn't stay there and cause a scene. I couldn't pretend that this was okay. I just needed some space to think. As the Uber drove away, I looked back at my grandfather's house. My house, glowing with light and filled with life, full of people who didn't know me, didn't respect me, and apparently didn't even miss me when I wasn't included. The betrayal was a deep cut. But it was the utter disrespect for my grandfather's wishes and for my personal space that hurt the most. I checked into the hotel in a stupor, dropped my suitcase by the generic desk, and just sat on the edge of the bed. The silence of the room was a jarring contrast to the chaos I had just escaped. I picked up my phone and stared at the screen, wondering who I should call, what I should do, and how I could ever look at my home the same way again. The hotel room felt cold and impersonal, but at least it was quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like an hour, my mind replaying the night's events like a terrible movie I couldn't switch off. This wasn't the first time my mother and brother had brushed my feelings aside, but this was by far the most egregious example. As the initial shock started to fade, a flood of memories came back to me, revealing a pattern I had somehow accepted as normal but now saw with painful clarity. My 8th birthday party, where my mother invited my whole class but forgot to order a cake I wasn't allergic to. "Oh, Rachel, don't make a scene. The other children are having fun." My high school graduation, where they showed up late and left early to get to Ethan's baseball game. "It's the semifinals, Rachel. You just walk across a stage. We'll see the pictures." The biggest one was when I won a prestigious engineering scholarship, and my mother's first response was to ask if I had considered a more feminine field. All the while, Ethan's mediocre grades were celebrated. His abandoned hobbies were funded, and his irresponsibility was excused as finding himself. I called my best friend, Hannah, at midnight, not even caring how late it was. Hannah had been a witness to my family's dynamics for over 20 years and never held back her opinions. "They did muhati," she yelled after I explained the situation. "In your house, without even telling you?" "Oh, hell no, Rachel. That is beyond disrespectful. Am I overreacting?" I asked, a sliver of self-doubt creeping in, just as I'd been conditioned to feel my whole life. "Overreacting? If anything, you're underreacting. They invaded your private space, used your property without your permission, and didn't even invite you to a family event happening In your own home! That's not normal, Rachel. That is not okay. Hannah's validation was the anchor I needed. It solidified what I already knew deep down. This wasn't just about a party. This was about a fundamental, deep-seated lack of respect that had been the defining feature of my relationship with my mother and brother for decades. I had set boundaries, and they had consistently trampled them. I had offered olive branches, and they had taken them for granted. I had made excuses for their behavior that they never once had to make for me. I barely slept that night, my mind racing through all the possibilities. Confront them. They'd just downplay it. Demand an apology. They'd give me a hollow one just to smooth things over until the next time. Try to explain how I felt. They'd just make me feel like I was being overly sensitive. Morning finally came, and with it, a sense of resolve. I went back to my house around 9 a.m., assuming most of the guests would have left. I was right about the guests, but I was dead wrong about the condition of my home. The scene was even worse than I had imagined. Empty bottles and glasses were on every surface. Food had been ground into my Persian rugs. Someone had gotten sick in my powder room sink. Rented chairs were stacked carelessly in the middle of my living room. My garden looked like a tornado had ripped through it. My mother was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling on her phone. She looked up as I walked in. There you are. Where did you run off to last night? So dramatic, Rachel. No apology, no acknowledgement of the violation, just criticism of my reaction. I stayed in a hotel since my bedroom was apparently being used as a coat check. I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. Oh, that was Ethan's idea. We needed the space. You know how these things are. The cleaning crew will be here at noon. That's not the point. Mom, you used my house without asking me. You didn't even tell me there was a family reunion, let alone invite me to it. She let out a heavy sigh, as if I were being completely unreasonable. You're always working. Anyway, would you have even come? Besides, you're so particular about everything. If we had asked you, you would have had a million rules. Yes, I would have had rules about how my personal property is used. That's normal. Just then, Ethan wandered out of the guest room, his hair a mess, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Morning, he mumbled, making a beeline for the coffee pot. Great party, right? Everyone loved the house. Ethan, why didn't you tell me about this reunion? I asked him directly. He shrugged. We needed a big place. And you have all this room. Seemed like a no-brainer. What's the big deal? We're family. The big deal is that this is my home. Not some public event space. You can't just decide to use it without my permission. Technically, it's the family home. My mother chimed in. Your grandfather would have wanted everyone to enjoy it. That was the spark that lit the fuse. Don't you dare tell me what my grandfather would have wanted. He specifically left this house to me because he knew I would respect it and take care of it. I had to walk away from them. I needed to see the full extent of the damage. What I found took me from angry to absolutely livid. In the study, my grandfather's antique mahogany desk, the very one he had used to teach me about craftsmanship and integrity, had a deep scratch carved across its surface and what looked like a burn mark from a cigarette, despite my strict no smoking policy inside. That desk wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was where he had taught me how to draft, where he had written my college recommendation letters, where he had signed his final will. I went to my home office and found the door ajar, a room I always kept locked. Someone had either picked or forced the lock. Inside, drawers were pulled open, my work documents had been shuffled around, and my laptop was gone. The framed first dollar I ever earned from freelancing in college had been knocked off the wall, the frame now cracked. Upstairs was just as bad. My bedroom door was open despite the clear, private, please keep closed sign I had on it. My closet was open. Dresser drawers weren't shut all the way. Someone had been in my most personal space, touching my things. I went back downstairs to find my mother and brother casually chatting about some cousin, Phil, who had apparently been the life of the party with his karaoke skills. My office was broken into. I said, my voice flat. My bedroom was entered. Grandfather's desk is damaged. Oh, some of the kids were probably playing hide and seek, Ethan said dismissively. And that thing on the desk is probably just a water ring. It'll buff out. It's a cigarette burn and a knife scratch. I corrected him. It's a 200-year-old desk, always so dramatic about things. My mother sighed. It's just stuff, Rachel. Just stuff. Those words echoed in my head. To them, this house and everything in it was just stuff. Stuff they felt entitled to use, damage, and dismiss because we happened to share some DNA. But to me, it was more than stuff. It was my sanctuary, my history, my private space that had been violated by the very people who should have respected it the most. I pulled out my phone and called Hannah again. Can you come over? I need some moral support. While I waited for her, I walked through every single room, taking pictures of all the damage. When she arrived, she gasped when she saw the state of the house. This is so much worse than I imagined, she said, giving me a hug. What are you going to do? I looked around at the home I had loved, which now felt tainted by disrespect. I don't know yet, I said, but I know I can't keep pretending this is normal. After Hannah left, I made another call. This one was to Scott Reynolds, a real estate agent who had contacted me several times about selling the property. The Victorian was in a prime location, and developers had been circling it ever since my grandfather passed away. Scott, it's Rachel Morgan. You remember that offer you mentioned last month? Is it still on the table? My mother and brother, who were in the kitchen talking about which relatives still needed a ride to the airport, went dead silent when they heard my side of the conversation. For the first time since I had gotten home, I had their complete and undivided attention. Scott was at my house within the hour. His usual slick real estate agent persona softened a bit when he saw the condition of the property. This isn't how I remember the house looking during our last chat, he said tactfully, eyeing a stain on the entryway wallpaper. Family gathering, I said curtly. Let's talk in the garden. We sat at the wrought iron table on my patio, which was the only area that had been relatively untouched by the reunion mayhem. Scott opened his portfolio and got right to the point, which I appreciated. The cash buyer I mentioned before is still very interested. Victor Zhang, a tech entrepreneur who just moved here from California. He's been looking for a historic property in this specific neighborhood. What's his timeline? I asked. He's highly motivated. He's in a short-term rental right now and wants to get settled quickly. He can close as fast as you can handle the paperwork. And he understands it's an as-is sale. I wouldn't have to make any repairs or improvements. Scott nodded. At this price point and in this market, he's buying for the location and the historical value. He's planning on renovating anyway. I took a deep breath. What's his offer? Oh, 2.1 million cash. It's slightly below market value for the quick timeline, but there are no inspection contingencies, no financing delays. I nodded slowly, a strange sense of calm washing over me. I want to move forward. Scott tried to hide his surprise and excitement. Are you sure? This is a big decision. The house has been in your family for generations. I'm very aware of its history. That's exactly why I'm making this decision. I glanced toward the kitchen window, where I could see my mother and brother having an animated conversation, probably speculating about what I was doing with Scott. How quickly can we get the paperwork drawn up? I can have the preliminary documents ready for you this afternoon. The full contract by the end of the day. If the buyer agrees to expedite his side, we could potentially close in a matter of days instead of weeks. Perfect. And I'll need a good real estate lawyer to make sure everything is handled correctly. Scott made a quick call, and by 2 p.m., my lawyer, Diane Matthews, had arrived. I had worked with her before when I set up my will and power of attorney. She was thorough and discreet, which was exactly what I needed. While Scott was in my damaged study preparing the initial paperwork, Diane and I had a private conversation in the garden. Are you absolutely certain about this, Rachel? A rushed sale usually benefits the buyer more than the seller. I understand that, Diane, but my circumstances have changed, and I need to move quickly. The price is fair enough, considering the convenience of a cash deal and a fast closing. She studied my face. This isn't like you. You're usually so methodical with your financial decisions. Sometimes clarity just hits you suddenly. I replied. I've realized this house has become more of a burden than a blessing. By late afternoon, I had signed the preliminary documents and given Scott the go. Ahead to present the offer to Victor Zhang. My mother and brother had been suspiciously quiet, watching from a distance, but not daring to interfere. That all changed the moment Scott left. What was that all about? My mother demanded as she came into the garden, where I was reviewing paperwork with Diane. Business, I replied simply. What kind of business needs a real estate agent at our family home? Her emphasis on the word, or, did not go unnoticed. I introduced Diane as my attorney, which immediately put my mother on high alert. I'm selling the house, I said calmly. The buyer is ready to close quickly. I'll need you both to have your things out by tomorrow evening. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, the explosion. You can't be serious, my mother finally sputtered. This is impulsive and ridiculous, even for you. Ethan stepped forward. Come on. Rachel, you're just overreacting about the party. We said we were sorry. Neither of you has actually apologized, I pointed out. But this isn't about apologies anymore. This is about realizing that some boundaries, once they're crossed, can't be uncrossed. So you're punishing us by selling our family home. My mother's voice rose with indignation. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making a decision about my property that makes sense for my life going forward. Whip won't let you do this, Ethan threatened. Grandpa would never have wanted you to sell. Rah. Grandpa trusted me to make my own decisions. That's why he left the house to me, not to the family as a whole. My mother changed her strategy, her voice suddenly soft. Rachel, honey, you're upset. I get it. What we did was thoughtless. But selling your grandfather's house is a decision you'll regret for the rest of your life. Let's all just take some time to cool down. It was the same old pattern I had seen my whole life: minimize, deflect, and then pretend to compromise when those tactics didn't work. Not this time. The decision is made, Mom. I've signed the preliminary documents. Mr. Jang has already verbally accepted the offer and is sending the signed contract back tonight. Diane, bless her heart, chose that moment to step in. Mrs. Morgan, the transaction is already in motion. Your daughter has every legal right to sell her property. I would suggest you respect her decision and start focusing on your arrangements for relocation. My mother turned to me, tears welling up in her eyes. Where are we supposed to go on such short notice? The manipulation was so obvious it was almost laughable. The same place you were living before you decided to move in here without asking. Your apartment. The one I've been helping you pay for. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. I could contest Grandpa's will. Say he was manipulated or not of sound mind. Diane answered before I even had to. The deadline for contesting the will passed 18 months ago, Mr. Morgan. And I personally conducted the capacity assessment before your grandfather signed his will. It would be a frivolous claim. I spent the rest of the evening methodically, packing the things that truly mattered to me. My grandfather's collection of first edition engineering books, family photos from happier times, the small wooden box of letters he had written to me while I was in college. I carefully wrapped his pocket watch and the fountain pen he had used to sign his final will. The desk would have to stay. It was too damaged to move safely without professional help, and it was too painful for me to look at every day. Maybe Victor Jang would have it restored, or maybe he'd replace it with something modern. Either way, I was learning that the memories attached to things live on, even when the things themselves are gone. My mother made several more attempts to change my mind, cycling between guilt, anger, and sudden promises to be better in the future. Ethan alternated between threats and trying to bargain with me. I stood my ground, feeling a strange sense of peace despite all the chaos swirling around me. By midnight, my essential belongings were packed in my car. I had booked a room at an extended stay hotel until I could find a new place. As I was getting ready to leave for the night, I took one last walk through the house. It wasn't a goodbye, but a release. Every room held memories, but I realized that the most important ones were the ones I would carry with me. My mother was standing in the foyer as I walked to the door, ready with her final attempt at manipulation. "If you do this, Rachel, you are tearing this family apart." I turned to her with a sad smile. "Mom, you can't tear apart something that was never really together." I slept more soundly in that hotel that night than I had in months. The next morning was bright and clear. I got to the house by 8 a.m. and found Victor Jiang and his assistant already waiting outside. Scott made the introductions. Victor was younger than I had expected, maybe in his early 40s. With a quiet confidence and a thoughtful way about him. He had made his fortune in sustainable technology and was refreshingly direct. "I appreciate you expediting this process, Ms. Morgan. I understand this is a significant property with a lot of family history. Please, call me Rachel. And yes, it has history, but it's ready for a new chapter." We walked through the house together. I didn't try to hide any of the damage from the reunion, and to his credit, Victor didn't flinch or try to renegotiate the price based on its condition. "The bones are magnificent," he commented, looking at the original crown molding in the living room. "You just can't build this kind of character anymore." In my grandfather's study, he stopped at the damaged desk. "This is a shame. American Empire period, yes? Circa 1830. My grandfather cherished it. I know a restoration expert who specializes in period furniture. If you're not taking it with you, I'd like to have it properly repaired." That small gesture of respect for the house's history meant more to me than he could ever know. After the walkthrough, we all gathered in the dining room where Diane had the closing documents laid out. The process was surprisingly simple for such a major transaction. Signatures, initials, more signatures. Scott was beaming the whole time, probably mentally calculating his commission. As we were reviewing the final documents, the front door burst open. My brother Ethan stormed in, followed by my mother. "Stop! This is a mistake," Ethan shouted, his face flushed with anger, or maybe alcohol. Victor and his assistant exchanged worried looks. Diane stepped forward, ever the professional. "Mr. Morgan? This is a private real estate closing. If you are not a party to this transaction, I must ask you to leave." My mother pushed past Diane and spoke directly to Victor. "This house has been in our family for generations. My daughter is making an emotional decision that she's going to regret. Surely, as a businessman, you understand the importance of careful consideration." Victor looked uncomfortable but held his ground. "Mrs. Morgan, I have deep respect for family bonds, but I have entered into a legal contract with Rachel, who I understand is the sole owner of this property." Ethan moved closer, desperation in his eyes. "Rachel, please. We can work this out. We'll respect your space. No more surprise parties. You can have whatever rules you want." For a split second, I felt a flicker of doubt. These were the promises I had wanted to hear yesterday, last week, last year. But I knew they were empty, offered only now that something was being taken away from them, not out of any genuine respect for my boundaries. "It's too late, Ethan. The decision is made." My mother played her final card. If you do this, you're destroying your grandfather's legacy. Is that what you want? I put my pen down and turned to face her directly. Grandpa's legacy isn't this house, Mom. It's the values he lived by and taught me: integrity, respect, self-reliance. He left me this house because he trusted my judgment. I'm using that judgment now. Be throwing away your family, she countered, tears streaming down her face. No. By recognizing that family is supposed to support and respect each other, not exploit and dismiss each other. You've had countless chances to treat me like a valued member of this family. Instead, you've treated me like an inconvenience at best and a resource to be used at worst. Ethan stepped forward, his tone menacing. If you do this, don't expect us to be there for you when you realize what a huge mistake you've made. I looked at my brother, the boy I had helped with his homework, the teenager whose bail I had paid, the adult whose business ideas I had funded. I felt a deep sadness, but also a strange sense of relief. That's a risk I'm willing to take. Diane, ever practical, cut through the family drama. If we could please continue with the closing, Mr. Jang has a tight schedule. My mother made one last emotional plea, promising that things would be different, that she finally understood how I felt, that we could start over. But her words rang hollow against the backdrop of decades of similar, broken promises. I signed the last of the documents. Victor Jang handed over a cashier's check for the down payment, with the rest to be wired once the deed was recorded. We shook hands, and just like that, the house that had been in my family for 3 generations belonged to someone else. The moment was anticlimactic. There was no thunderclap, no dramatic music, just the sound of papers being gathered and the quiet click of briefcases closing. After the formalities were done, Victor approached me. I want you to know I will honor the history of this home. It won't be torn down or fundamentally changed. Thank you. That means a lot. I handed him a set of keys, the same keys my grandfather had given me 2 years before. There's a hidden compartment in the library, behind the 3rd bookshelf from the left. My grandfather kept historical documents about the house in there. You might find them interesting. He took the keys with a respectful nod. You're welcome to visit, if you ever want to. That's kind of you, but I don't think I will. Some chapters just need to stay closed. My mother and brother watched in stunned silence as I gathered my things. There were no goodbye hugs, no wishes for good luck in my new life, just the heavy weight of choices made and consequences accepted. As I walked down the front path for the last time, I felt lighter with every step. The garden that had once brought me so much joy now only reminded me of disrespect. The walls that had witnessed my grandfather's lessons now echoed with the sounds of a party I wasn't invited to. I put the last box in my car and looked back one final time. My mother was standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. My brother was nowhere in sight. I raised my hand in a small wave, then got in my car and drove away from the house with a check for $2.1 million in my purse and a future that was uncertain but finally unburdened. The first week after selling the house went by in a blur of practical tasks. I moved from the extended stay hotel into a furnished apartment with a 6-month lease, giving myself some time to figure out where I wanted to live permanently. I opened a new investment account for most of the money, set aside funds for taxes, and tried to get used to my new reality. The silence from my family was both expected and unsettling. No calls, no texts, not even an angry voicemail. It was like I had simply ceased to exist for them the moment I signed those papers. Part of me was relieved to be free of the drama, but another part of me ached for the family I wished I had. One that would have acknowledged the pain they caused and genuinely tried to make things right. That silence was shattered on day 9, when my social media accounts were suddenly flooded with messages from extended family members. Cousins I barely knew, great-aunts I hadn't seen in years, all of them expressing their shock and disappointment at my selfish decision to rob the family of its heritage. The story they had been told was, predictably, one-sided. According to the family grapevine, I had thrown a tantrum over a harmless family get-together and impulsively sold our shared legacy out of spite. There was no mention of the uninvited use of my home, the damage to irreplaceable heirlooms, or the years of disrespect that had led me to my breaking point. I didn't bother to reply to most of the messages, but I did answer my cousin Melissa, who had always been kind to me. Her message was more balanced than the others, genuinely asking if I was okay. "I'm doing fine," I wrote back. "There's more to the story than you've probably heard, but I'm at peace with my decision. I hope you and your family are well." Her response surprised me. I figured there was more to it. Your mom and Ethan have always had their own version of reality. For what it's worth, I think Grandpa Maxwell would understand. He never let anyone walk all over him, either. That small piece of validation from someone who had actually known my grandfather meant more than she could ever know. At work, I poured all my energy into making the Helvetica banking systems project a success. My team noticed my renewed focus and energy. During our weekly lunch, Hannah commented that I seemed lighter, somehow, despite everything that had happened. "I feel lighter," I admitted. I didn't realize how much emotional weight that house carried. Not just the good memories of Grandpa, but the constant battle with Mom and Ethan. Now, when I come home, it's just my space. No history. No expectations, no disappointment. "Have you heard from them at all?" Hannah asked. Not directly. I heard through the family rumor mill that they had to move back into Mom's apartment. Apparently, they had already started moving some of their things into the house, assuming they could just stay there indefinitely. Hannah just shook her head. The audacity. They thought I would just keep tolerating whatever they dished out, like I always have. 2 weeks after the sale, I got an email from Victor Jang. He had attached photos of the restoration work that was beginning on my grandfather's desk. "The craftsman believes he can repair the damage completely," he wrote. "When it's finished, would you like to have it? It seems to hold special meaning for you." His unexpected kindness brought tears to my eyes. I declined his offer. The desk belonged with the house. But his acknowledgement of its importance was healing in a way I hadn't expected. That same evening, I was making dinner in my new apartment when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw my mother standing in the hallway. She looked disheveled in a way I had never seen before. Her normally perfect hair was unkempt. Her clothes were wrinkled, and it was clear she had been crying. My first instinct was not to answer, to protect the peace I had worked so hard to create. But something, maybe my grandfather's voice in the back of my head reminding me about integrity, made me open the door. "Mom," I said simply, not inviting her in, but not sending her away either. "Rachel," her voice cracked on my name. "Can I please come in? Just to talk." I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. She came in cautiously, as if she expected to be thrown out at any second. My apartment was modest compared to the Victorian, a simple two-bedroom with standard fixtures and builder-grade finishes. Nothing special. But it was mine, completely mine. "It's nice," she offered, looking around, cozy. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked. Too tired for small talk. She sank down onto my couch, suddenly looking every one of her 62 years. "We've been evicted from my apartment. The landlord found out Ethan was living there, and the lease specifically prohibited additional occupants." Of course. She hadn't come to reconcile. She had come for help, financial help, most likely. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Where are you staying now?" "A motel, for now. It's not ideal. Ethan is looking for work, but you know how that goes." I did know. My brother's employment history was a series of enthusiastic starts followed by abrupt departures. "What about your savings?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Used for the reunion," she admitted, not meeting my eyes. "And some for Ethan's latest business idea, a specialty coffee shop." The location fell through. The admission just hung there in the air between us. My mother had spent her savings on a party I wasn't even invited to, and on yet another of my brother's doomed ventures. "How much do you need?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. She looked up, a flash of hope in her eyes. "Just enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a new place. 3,000, maybe 4,000. I'll pay you back." Of course. The familiar pattern was playing out right in front of me. Her crisis, my resources, promises of repayment that would never materialize. For a moment, I actually considered it. It would be easier than the alternative. I had the money. But then I thought about what my grandfather would say about enabling versus helping. "I can't give you money, Mom." Her face fell. "Rachel, we're about to be homeless. After everything I've done for you." "I'm not saying I won't help," I interrupted. "I'm saying I won't give you money. There's a difference." She looked confused. "What difference?" "I won't enable the same patterns that got us into this mess. But I will help you find resources. Affordable housing options, employment counseling for Ethan, maybe even financial planning services." "We don't need counseling or services. We need a place to live." "You need both," I said firmly. "And if you're willing to accept the kind of help I'm offering, help that might actually change things, then I'm here for you. But I will not just write a check that postpones the next inevitable crisis." She stood up, anger replacing her desperation. So this is your revenge, making us jump through hoops when you're sitting on millions of dollars. This isn't revenge, Mom. It's boundaries. Something I should have said a long time ago. Boundaries, she scoffed. Is that what your therapist calls abandoning your family when they need you? I took a deep breath. Yes, I am seeing a therapist. Because healthy people seek help when they need it. That's what I'm offering you. Real help. Not a temporary band-aid. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Keep your help and your judgments. We'll manage without you, just like we always have. The irony of that statement, when she had shown up specifically, because they couldn't manage without me, was not lost on either of us. As she reached for the doorknob, I said quietly, "The offer stands, Mom. When you're ready for real change, call me." She paused, her back to me, her shoulders rigid. For a second, I thought she might turn around, might recognize the opportunity she was being given. Instead, she opened the door and left without another word. I sat alone in my new apartment, the dinner I had been making now cold on the stove. The encounter had been painful, but it had also been clarifying. For the first time in my life, I had offered help with conditions that were designed to create actual change rather than just perpetuate the cycle of dependency. It wasn't what she wanted, but maybe, just maybe, it was what she needed. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah, checking in. "You okay?" I thought about the question for a moment before I replied. Getting there, one day at a time. And surprisingly, it was true. 6 months passed in a flash. Spring turned into summer, and summer into fall. My temporary apartment was replaced by a cozy townhouse in a quieter part of town, with a small but private garden where I planted tulips in memory of my grandfather. My career continued to thrive. The Helvetica project led to a promotion and more international responsibilities. The biggest changes, though, were internal. Weekly therapy sessions helped me to recognize the patterns I had normalized my whole life and to develop healthier ways of dealing with conflict. I learned that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary, and that helping others didn't have to mean sacrificing myself. After our confrontation in my apartment, my mother and I didn't speak for almost 3 months. I heard through Melissa that she and Ethan had found a small two-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. Ethan had gotten a job at a local hardware store. It wasn't his dream job, but it was steady employment for the first time in years. When my mother finally did call, her tone was different, less entitled, more hesitant. "Rachel, it's me. I was wondering if we could meet somewhere. Just to talk." We agreed to meet at a neutral spot, a coffee shop halfway between our homes. I got there early and chose a table by the window where I could see her coming. She looked older, more subdued, but there was a dignity to her that I hadn't seen before. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she sat down, wrapping her hands around her cup for warmth. "What have you been thinking about?" I asked, cautious but open. "About everything. The house, the reunion, the way I've treated you." She took a deep breath. "I wasn't fair to you, Rachel. Not just with the party, but for years. I favored Ethan. I took you for granted. I resented your success instead of celebrating it. Her admission was stunning. Never in my life had I heard my mother acknowledge any wrongdoing, let alone a long, standing pattern of behavior. What brought this on? I asked. Reality, she said with a sad smile. When you have nothing, you start to see things a lot more clearly. And I had a good teacher in that department. What do you mean? Your grandfather. After you sold the house, I was so angry. I went to visit his grave to, I don't know, complain to him about you. She shook her head at the memory. While I was there, I remembered something he used to always say to me when I was young. Beverly, life doesn't owe you anything. It's what you build with your own two hands that matters. She looked up at me, her eyes glistening. I realized I stopped building a long time ago. I just expected things to be given to me. By your father, by my parents, by you. That's not the example I should have set for my children. The conversation wasn't easy. There were tense moments, old habits threatening to creep back in. But there was also an honesty that had been missing from our relationship for decades. I can't change the past, she said as we were getting ready to leave. But I'd like to try for a better future. If you're willing. I didn't make any promises I couldn't keep. I'm open to trying, Mom. One step at a time. Rebuilding trust is a slow process. We started with monthly dinners, just the two of us at first. Eventually, we included Ethan. Once he started to show his own willingness to change. Our first holiday meal together was at a restaurant. Neutral ground that didn't carry the weight of past conflicts. My relationship with my brother evolved more slowly. His resentment ran deeper. His sense of entitlement more ingrained. But necessity had forced changes in him that neither of us could have predicted. The job at the hardware store led to an interest in home repair. By the following spring, he had earned his contractor's license and started his own small handyman business. I like fixing things, he told me during a rare moment of vulnerability. There's something satisfying about taking something that's broken and making it work again. I didn't point out the metaphor. He would figure it out in his own time. Not all of my family relationships could be saved. Some relatives chose to stick to their narrative of me as the selfish villain who destroyed the family legacy. I learned to make peace with their perception, understanding that I couldn't control how other people saw my choices. Instead, I focused on building my chosen family, friends who respected my boundaries, colleagues who valued my contributions, neighbors who became confidantes. Hannah remained my unwavering supporter, and I expanded my circle to include people who brought positivity into my life. 6 months turned into a year. I got an unexpected email from Victor Jang with pictures of the completed restoration of the house. He had preserved its historical character while modernizing the infrastructure. My grandfather's desk, fully restored, held a place of honor in the study. The garden had been replanted according to historical plans, including a pattern of tulips that spelled out, onward, when viewed from above. Your grandfather's legacy lives on, he wrote. Different, but honored. His words perfectly captured what I had been trying to articulate about my own journey. My connection to my grandfather wasn't contained in wood and plaster, it was in the values he had instilled in me: integrity, self-respect, and the courage to build something that lasts. The house had been a symbol, an important one, but in the end, it was just a vessel. The real inheritance was the strength to make difficult choices, to value myself enough to set boundaries, and to recognize when letting go was the bravest thing I could do. On the 1-year anniversary of selling the house, I invited my mother and brother to dinner at my townhouse. It was the first time they had visited my new home. The conversation was a little awkward at times, old habits occasionally surfacing, but there was also laughter, genuine interest in each other's lives, and a tentative foundation for something much healthier than what we'd had before. As they were getting ready to leave, my mother paused in the doorway. "You know," she said, "I think your grandfather would be proud of you for selling his house." I asked, surprised. "For having the courage to make hard choices." Maxwell never took the easy path either. Her words were the final piece of validation I didn't even realize I was still waiting for. Later that evening, I sat in my small garden, surrounded by blooming tulips, reflecting on the journey of the past year. I had lost a house, but I had gained clarity. I had enforced boundaries, but I had created space for genuine connection. I had honored my grandfather's legacy, not by clinging to a physical building, but by living the principles he believed in. The path ahead wasn't perfectly clear, but it also wasn't burdened by the weight of toxic patterns and unmet expectations. Each day brought new opportunities to build relationships based on mutual respect instead of obligation or guilt. Some days were harder than others, but even the difficult moments felt honest, in a way my previous life never had. I often think about that moment of decision, standing in my damaged home, surrounded by the aftermath of disrespect, and choosing to let go rather than continue the cycle. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the right one for me. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is release what no longer serves us, even when that something is wrapped in the comfortable cloak of family tradition. If you're watching this and struggling with similar decisions, please remember that boundaries aren't walls designed to keep people out. They are guidelines that teach others how to respectfully stay in your life. Your worth is not determined by how much you are willing to tolerate, but by how much you are willing to respect yourself. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice for your own well-being that other people didn't understand? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And if this resonated with you, please subscribe and hit the like button so that others can find this message too. Remember, family is important, but so are you. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to write your own, whatever that may look like.